Hi everyone, I feel like ranting about something, and it's been a while since I did an improv ranting video. So over the years of making things, you take part in a lot of conversations about the creation process, you get a lot of comments from people, you see a lot of discussions in different corners of the community, and there's a couple of things that have become a bit like pet peeves almost. One of them that I think comes up quite a lot is, why don't you just? And this one, I've got so many thoughts about it because it's such a historical one as well. So why don't you just appears, you make something cool, you try a novel technique, you try and come up with new techniques, and then someone inevitably says, why don't you just do this? Why don't you just use this? Why don't you just blah, 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 blah. You've heard it, you've seen it, etc. I know there might have been times in the past, especially when I was a bit younger, when I might have said the same thing as well. I think it's by far one of the dumbest comments someone can make. And I'm going to explain why, okay? So some people are making things to produce an efficient output. Some people are making things to learn and to create new techniques for things. If you don't explore new territory, new things don't get made. Imagine, for example, someone's trying to design a car for the first time. Someone says, wait, why are you going through all that effort? Why don't you just use a horse? In Blender, it's happened I had it, when doing the Afterglow project. My personal exploration into the domain of physical diegetic lighting in cycles. How can we push it? How can we build environments? How can we make use of that surface area effect that we get from emissive shaders? And I pointed out how there's so much you can do. You have so much physical presence. You can move things to the edges of the studio space, change the ceiling dynamically. Everything is reactive and responsive to the reflection. And a comment I got was, why don't you just use HDRIs? And I'm like, do you understand the level of difference between possibilities of these two things? This physical system is so good, it can create an infinite number of HDRIs. HDRIs are the smallest granular element by comparison. It's imagine you're a creative, right? You're an R&D artist, whatever, you're a developer. Your mind is working in this huge space of potential. And someone goes, why don't you just do the minimum potential thing? It's so reductive to creativity. And that's why it gets on my nerves so much. But, we need to be balanced about it. Sometimes it's just genuine, very nice, learning discussion. Someone that's new to the space, oh wait, why don't you use this technique? Because I'm curious in learning about the potential. Why did you go with this rather than that? And I think that's cool. I like that. We can then introduce people that haven't known about this before to a new world of possibility. It's nice when people ask why a method has been used instead of something else from a genuine learning perspective. But that's not always the case when it comes to the why don't you just blank comments. Sometimes it's an intellectual superiority thing. But I think that's still dumb and cringe. And I'm sure you've seen it. People are why don't you just use this? Oh my God, didn't he know this is easier? That kind of thing. But again, when you're looking at things from here's a huge world of possibility with so much potential for creative investment. And also in my case, tool development potential and stuff like that. And you compare that to this single pathetic commonly used method or whatever. And then someone from that tiny world is going, doesn't he know you can just use this? I find that kind of funny because they think they're intellectually superior, but they're just kind of pathetic. All of this is putting aside the fact that it shouldn't actually even be a conversation because, especially when it comes to creativity, people should just be able to do what they want, how they want. Because I know I said it in so many videos and I say it all the time, even on social media and stuff, not everyone is looking for a job. And for me, especially not in the visual effects field, I'm not interested in it at all. Which is kind of funny because, I've said before again, Blender community is kind of saturated with ex-visual effects seniors and their little, creative cults that follow them around, and they're very postury about the right ways to do things. And I'm not compatible with that mentality whatsoever. I think, this is a creative space. Let people just have fun, do things how they want to do it. If they want to explore certain things, I think that's great because that adds more creative and developmental value back to the community, especially if they share the techniques. Okay, here's another thought experiment for you. So imagine that you own the perfect space. Maybe it's a hangar, maybe it's just a large open field, maybe it's just an abandoned warehouse. And imagine you could do anything you wanted in that space. You have the technology to figure anything out, to learn anything, to build anything. What are you going to do? Build a robot army maybe? Cool. Do you want to communicate with alien life? Sure, let's do that. Do you want to split the atom? I wouldn't recommend that, but if you're trying to figure things out, it's your conceptual sci-fi den. Why don't you can be Iron Man? Sure, let's do that. So you have a space you've designed, you can do anything. It's your it's a teenage boy's dream. This is my equivalent, by the way. Now, in that space, you're building whatever your heart desires. It's just pure fun and exploration. It's also your way of developing your concept of power. Bit of a weird thing to talk about. You know, a lot of people try to gain power in their lives through different means. Largely, it's just autonomy over yourself, right? So building up enough savings so you don't have to work, control over your environment, etc. Some people go a more political route and they're very weird. Power over other people. I like to think about it in my way as I want power over my creative autonomy and also for my learning. So that's why I enjoy being in a space like this where I can do whatever I want. So you're in that space. Now imagine that around the border of that space, you have like just a group of naysayers. So like all the critical people you can imagine, and their only job is just to watch you in your private space and go, why are you doing that? Are you stupid? Doesn't he know he can do this? Why not just do this? Blah, 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 blah. If anyone's confused about the kind of paradigm that I have with like the internet and YouTube, this is kind of what I feel like when I get those responses. I feel like I'm in this perfect space that I've designed and I'm doing whatever I find fun because I want to, kind of discovering the new possibilities of techniques. And when I put something out and then I get messages like that back, in my mind, it's like just this row of naysayers that don't really do anything. They don't really make anything. They don't really contribute any value anywhere. They're just like, doesn't he know? Isn't he stupid? Blah, 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 blah. And it's not even just like a conceptual like impossibility, that idea. This is literally that space I've described. If I wanted, I could, there's like a patio door there. I could just put a giant screen there and put the YouTube and, you know, whatever other social platform feed there. And that would literally be the equivalent of those people standing there. So I think that's one of the worst things you can say to a artist, but it's not just an artist. It's just anyone who likes exploring untouched areas, maybe? That sounds like a euphemism. Anyone that likes kind of exploring the intellectual frontier of areas that haven't had much development done on them, or trying to find links between features or areas that haven't really been linked before. So again, like the most recent one is my last video, the alien embryo one. You know, one innocent comment underneath that saying, oh, why don't you just use shaders instead of geometry nodes for the geoproximity? I'm like, well, thinking again of what I just spoke about, shaders, teeny tiny, GeoNode for proximity, huge world of possibility. I got a similar message on Twitter as well. They said, yeah, why don't you just use shaders with empties? Again, teeny tiny, geometry nodes, huge world. Why would I play in the tiny ball pen when I can have a pool-sized ball pen? And I said that to the one on Twitter, and they said, yeah, but when you mentioned about just using vertices, I thought, why wouldn't he use shader nodes? Same thing again. I can use individual vertices in a massive ball pen. Just because I might want to use individual vertices for the geometry proximity doesn't mean I should reduce my potential down to the smallest possible environment, you know? And I feel like that's where we have just completely different perspectives on things. Again, I feel like, you know, people think they're being smart when they're like, why don't you just use this? Oh my God, this is easier. You're not. There are so often like 100 or 1,000 or, you know, X number of ways to do any particular thing in a creative endeavor. It's reductive to take that possibility and just slam it down to one thing that you think is efficient in your particular pipeline or environment. So my message there is open thy mind a bit. All right, another thing that's a bit of a pet peeve. Well, there's more things, obviously. This is my rant video. I'll get it out while I'm here. Some of my friends could tell you this. Sometimes I get irrationally annoyed when someone says that something is impossible. And I don't mean like the kind of narcissistic CEO perspective of, don't say it's impossible, get it done. I mean, when someone says that a creative technique shouldn't be possible, I get annoyed because I think that's just a skill issue. Optimistically, I think that if we're faced with a challenge, we can see a possible solution, but we can't find the route to get there. Some people may see that void and think, oh, that's going to be an impossible hurdle to cross. I do not like that mentality. I would prefer that we stay ambitious and actually put the effort into finding novel techniques to get across that void. I think that so many cool solutions to problems never get created because people look at that void and they go, that's impossible, and then walk away. That is what I find annoying. So a recent example of that would be when having a discussion with a friend about why we can't have image inputs as like node group inputs in the shader editor, because the shaders are a vector-based system. You know, this pixel thing and then how we're computing it at every step, it just wouldn't really work. It's not really possible to have image inputs as node groups in the shader editor. And I go, bullshit. There is a possible technical solution to every technical problem, in my mind anyway. If we can't visualize it, then we're just not smart enough. This has kind of appeared slightly as well in the gaming community, right? So Borderlands 4 came out recently. I'm a massive Borderlands fan. I have a few thoughts about that game. I don't really like the open world. I feel like it's, again, been a bit reductive for the creativity of the spaces. The spaces felt a bit more creative in the previous games. I don't like how they retroactively removed characters from the story because they weren't popular in the previous game. Justice for Ava, she needs a redemption arc. Also, charge-up weapons are stupid. I don't know why they brought them back. Putting that point aside, the CEO of the development company for that, Gearbox, Randy Pitchford, when the game came out, it had terrible performance, and it still does have terrible performance. It's based on Unreal Engine. I assume that the development company, being Gearbox, doesn't necessarily have access to the low-level features of Unreal Engine. But I don't know. But the thing is, he came out and said, players should not expect to run their rigs on this next generation game as well as they have in the past, because things update and things change. Borderlands 4 is a very diffuse-centric game when it comes to art style. The art style is not very complicated. There's not much of a step up in quality from the previous game in terms of like a visual style. There are some step ups, right? But a lot of it is very like Unreal Engine centric, atmospheric stuff, Lumen for lighting, etc., etc. Now, the performance drop is huge when you're comparing those two games for a marginal quality improvement. And their perspective on it was, no, we can't really fix that. Players should just expect that they need to get better rigs to handle that. This is a real life perspective of that this is impossible mentality coming into form. Randy Pitchford said, well, why don't players try making their own engine if they're complaining about the performance? The funny thing is, I'm actually in a community of people who do make their own graphical engines. Okay, so in my mind, when I see someone say that, I'm like, it's not the player's responsibility to develop your game for you. If you have a technical problem with something, being the performance for the project, it is your job to come up with the novel solutions to get around that issue. If your company is incapable of finding creative novel solutions for the performance that doesn't sacrifice the quality, then you have a skill issue. And that happens so much. I want to jump in here from the edit and just give an extra example from that point. Another game development company, Frontier Developments, who historically, I love Frontier. I've been to events that they've hosted. I applied there once or twice. They're the developers of the game Elite Dangerous, a really fantastic space sim. People might know it as a competitor to the Star Citizen project. It's a very impressive project because it has what is effectively a 1-to-1 scale representation of the Milky Way galaxy in it, which is cool, and it feeds in real astronomical data to build that star map. Now, going back about 10 years ago, when they first released it, they had this big plan to, allow you to walk around your spaceship and do all these extra things, go big game hunting on atmospheric planets and all that kind of thing. 10 years on, that hasn't happened. And they had an opportunity a few years ago to actually bring in the ability to walk around your ship. They decided not to do that, to instead allow you to basically just teleport outside the ship, engage in some basic activities and teleport back in. Now, it's been a really big discussion in the gaming community about what is the value of the immersive experience of being able to walk around what is effectively the main character of the game, being your ship. Recently, other similar projects like No Man's Sky have actually added the ability to do this. And it didn't even seem like it would be compatible with that. No Man's Sky. But the developers of No Man's Sky, Hello Games, they looked at their project, their game, and they thought, how can we integrate this? Like, what kind of novel solutions can we come up with to make this experience work in our project? That is an example of great creative thinking and problem solving. That's ambitious. It represents a good skill bank for the company. What Frontier did, and I can't believe they actually said this on a live stream, when faced with the opportunity to try and do space legs, and they may try and do it again in the future, I'm hoping they do, but answering the question of why can't we walk around the ship, rather than giving the example or the excuse of it would be difficult to do, like retroactively redesigning the ship interiors and all of that, which by the way is again a skill issue, they said, well, because when thinking about it from a gameplay loop, who really wants to spend like 5 minutes walking from one side of the ship to the other? Again, that's so reductive and it's so unambitious. Even if that was a problem, thinking about the paradigm again, problem, wasting time walking around the ship. Solution, not wasting time. From that perspective, it looks like they saw an issue and decided, you know what, it's not worth it at all. It is an absolutely pure example of a complete lack of any creative talent or skill when it comes to problem solving. You could have ship interiors while also solving the problem of it wasting time. A lot of other people in the community say, what would the point be of being able to let yourself walk through the ship if it doesn't add to the gameplay? That's another creative problem. Problem, no gameplay for interiors. Solution, gameplay for interiors. Use your creative skill to bind these things together. It kind of comes back to that first point, which is when people say, why don't you just do this? Why don't you just do this? And I just sit here sometimes reading those messages thinking, are you thick? Like 99% of all of these problems that people are raising can have solutions, and there's like thousands of possible solutions. Even if one of the problems, again for this Elite Dangerous project, is building the ship interiors would take a long time and a lot of resources, and it wouldn't be worth the time investment, and we wouldn't get a return on investment. That's another creative problem to solve. How do you get to ship interiors without it costing many resources? Am I going like mad with that? I get so frustrated kind of living in these community spaces where it's immediately reductive thinking. Oh, there's no point. Oh, it's impossible. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Just fucking try. But I suppose part of the problem for this is, in a lot of industries, there's no job for novel problem solver, like in a technical space. There's technical designers, there's technical artists, there's generalists and all kinds of specialists, right? In visual effects, sometimes you could have like a facial animation specialist. Great, that's cool. But there's no like problem solver role. I mean, maybe there are for some companies, right? But we don't really see that much around here. I feel like so many companies and creatives and spaces would benefit from having someone that can look at the void between problem and solution and just go, I know this looks difficult. I think if we explore this area, we may uncover some routes to get a bit further along this void. And yesterday was interesting because I don't know if I'll do a dedicated video about this, but maybe I will, maybe I won't. Superhive, formerly known as Blender Market, they made a bit of an oopsie. They sent an email to a bunch of creators, including me, saying that if we don't send a response, this is what the original email said. Okay, it wasn't just an implication. The email said this. It was poorly worded, but if we don't respond to every unanswered message in our inbox on our account for Superhive, including all of our products, will be deleted by the end of the month. And we were like, what the fuck? Considering like I get spam messages through my Superhive inbox and thank you messages from people as well, from people that I've already helped. The email said that if things were left unanswered, then the account would be deleted. Now, of course, I spoke to Superhive. I spoke to the team. I scared them a bit. I gave them a really angry email. I was basically like, what the fuck are you thinking? And I very quickly got a couple of emails back apologizing and saying, oh, that's not really what we intended, blah, 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 etc. I then gave a 5-minute audio message, I think, back to them, basically highlighting some of the extra issues I had, like with that idea conceptually. And I spoke about some of the safety concerns you'd have with that. Once people learn that creators have to respond to them on this platform at risk of the rather, blackmail-y thing of having their account deleted, then people will gravitate towards that platform knowing they're guaranteed a response, including bad actors, stalkers, people that have been blocked on other platforms, etc. I said about how help requests kind of decay over time, given that the product updates and changes and upgrades. So it'd be weird kind of coming out of nowhere like a creep to message potential customers from like 5 years ago. I said how some creators aren't very communicative, but they have ownership of their accounts, but they do have large followings. And if they left it, then someone would come in and impersonate them. So that's a concern. And I basically just rattled this stuff off. And I sat there afterwards thinking, I am effectively taking the role of this problem solver, which doesn't necessarily mean creating new problems. I did say to them as well, why don't you try doing additives, so like creative, positive reinforcement methods of encouraging creators to support by expanding the review system, maybe even to show customers that this creator is good at reviewing, rather than doing a subtractive or destructive or negative action of deleting a creator's account if there are withstanding inboxes. So here I am giving advice on the perspectives to take, and they're not paying me for that. Like, this is just like an annoyed feedback. But I'm sitting here thinking that so many companies, including, again, going back to Gearbox and for like the Borderlands example, would benefit from having one person whose job it is just to be general problem solver, who would also double up as being a perspective simulator, so that you can look at something like a new feature release and visualize it from the perspective of different people. It's like a new person coming in to use the service, or a customer, this, that, or the other. And that also requires a creative mindset. I know this has been going on for a bit. I'm just getting these things off my chest. So the pet peeves we've spoken about so far are, why don't you just do this? A very reductive stance on creativity. This is impossible. A very reductive approach to problem solving. And the lack of appreciating problem solving in like corporate environments. God knows what I'll call this video. Maybe something like things you should never say to an artist. But it's much more than that. It's not just about artwork specifically. Anyway, if you made it to the end, put a unicorn emoji in the comments. Already any emoji, but the unicorn is our default one. It's a bit of a brand symbol here now. Put it in the comments and I'll see if you made it this far. Have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time.